Ray Suarez. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Enrique, it's good to be with you.
Yeah, it's been a while. We had a chance.
Yeah, we
to
both
work.
had more hair back then.
yes, we did. Yes. When we were a little bit younger, you came to Seattle when I was working at KCTS and did a project for us. And I actually went back to the News Hour and visited you guys. I've always been a fan of your work, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk. About a number of different things with us. So I take it you've been watching the January 6th hearings. We're recording a day after Cassidy Hutchinson's shocking testimony. What do you think?
Well, the hearings taken as a whole, sort of for their cumulative power, remind you how much the stuff that we take for granted, as far as the meshing of the machinery and how all this works, depends on everybody involved more or less playing by the rules. We walk into this with the assumption that everybody's playing by the same rules. And if somebody gets a notion that they don't have to play by any of the rules and can make their own rules, the system doesn't quite know what to do with them. And in the case of Donald Trump, we see somebody who was so convinced they could overwhelm the delicate machinery that even as late as January 2nd, a couple of days before the affirmation of the Electoral College vote by the Congress, he was still trying to flip Georgia by muscling local elected officials on the phone in the capital, Atlanta. It is, I listened to the whole Raffensperger-Trump phone call, 67 minutes, which took a bit of intestinal fortitude to pull off, man. And it was shocking to hear the most powerful man on the planet trying to muscle a state official for with no particular reason and with no verifiable evidence to change the result of a state's election as part of his broader plan to also flip Michigan and Arizona and Pennsylvania and remain president, even though all the numbers people all around him told him that he had lost, how he had lost. They were even getting him ready in the days before the polls opened in November for losing, because all the signs were there. And he said, look, if I just muscle this system, if I create enough tumult, instability, and insecurity, I can get this thing into the House of Representatives. And if I do that, I stay president. It isn't a particular indictment of our system or particular praise for our system, but it is a reminder of how for more than 200 years, a lot of the operation, the sort of unremarkable operation of our system, has happened because everybody was sort of playing by the same rules. And in Donald Trump, we saw somebody finally who said, the rules don't apply to me. And that's what's so frightening about this whole thing.
Well, but they never have his entire life. That's one of the weird things about it. So in a lot of ways, I blame the media. I blame our profession for enabling Trump from the very beginning to treat his run for the presidency as a reality show, just for ratings and clicks. And so we kind of reaped what that sowed. How do you feel the media is covering this portion of the story? Do you think they're being more responsible this time?
Well, I always tremble a little bit when that blanket term, the media, is being used.
Well, the mainstream news.
It includes so many things from which people create their impressions of what reality is.
Yes.
Tweets, Facebook, Parler, and the CBS Evening News, and the New York Times, and the New York Post, and Breitbart. They're all in there in this toxic stew, offering different ways of looking at America and different conclusions to make about the country. For every nonsensical, content-free, free ad interview that Morning Joe did with Donald Trump by allowing him to appear by telephone, not making him show up in a studio, and just doing it day after day, there were articles in the responsible press, chapter and verse, about Donald Trump and his lawlessness, his risk-taking, his lack of success as a business person, his interpersonal relationships. It was all there. So when you say the media let him get away with it, yes, the media did, and a lot of the media didn't, but it didn't add up to the public's making conclusions about who this guy was that were, even as we're finding out, close to the truth. So now here we are 6 years later, and yes, it's all there. So the media is both giving him a pass and indicting him chapter and verse for the things that he's done. And you get to pick and choose your reality now. And that's the dangerous part about this particular moment.
Yeah.
You get to comfort yourself by choosing which reality you're going to align yourself with, rather than there just being one reality. We can make different conclusions about it, but there is only one reality. And we've unfortunately repealed that old idea about how reality works and how we're supposed to respond to it. And now you get to custom make your reality. And that is a dangerous moment for any polity, but certainly one that wants to be a democracy.
Yeah, and you didn't mention Fox News. And, I mean, that's
you said it.
I know, but I mean, talk about creating a reality or no reality.
Right. And look at how at the beginning, they weren't even showing the January 6th hearings. They had to be sort of shoved or pulled kicking and screaming into doing it, and now finally are doing it and losing ratings when they do, which is a part of the story as well.
Yeah, that is fascinating that people turn it off when they're watching Fox.
What do you see is the impact on our democracy? It seems to be fraying and at the seams here.
Well, we're still in the middle of the story, Enrique. I mean, if secretaries of state candidates across the country who are running for that office, the chief electoral official of their state, who also deny that Joe Biden was elected president, if a critical mass of those people win, that's a scary moment. That means that the person who's in charge of overseeing an election in your state is not entirely comported with reality, which should be a disturbing moment for people. We're still in the middle of the story. It's hard from this vantage point to know exactly how it all ends and what the end result will be. America's experiment on the fly with an unconventional leader may still have several chapters to run. We don't know how the bottom line of the January 6th committee leaves Trump as we approach the run-up to the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primaries. We don't know what that means to the fundraising pipeline and whether the DeSantises of the world will be formidably able to take Trump on no matter whether he decides to run or not, whether he will be exhausted and in so much legal trouble that it will become inadvisable for him to run. There's just still a lot of moving parts here that it's really hard. You know, at another time in our history, it might have been easier to handicap. But after the last 6 years, I never predict the future anymore.
Right.
I've been
Exactly.
I've been wrong so much about so much that I never even quietly to myself say, "Oh, yeah, well, this is a slam dunk." There are no more slam dunks anymore.
Yeah, I think all of us feel that way, and particularly those that have been reporting on any aspect of this, that what you thought could not possibly happen has happened, and it could happen again, and it could get worse to some respects. So, because we don't even know whether he'll be prosecuted. That's still out
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
And if
Totally
that,
still up in the air.
yeah, and if that happens, that's another thing that will just talk about roil up the
But
democracy.
prosecuting him, exactly, roiling is the right word, because
Yeah.
prosecuting him is an unpredictable outcome too. Because even if you've got him dead to rights and it's a slam dunk case that with other defendants, you wouldn't have any doubt of the outcome, this could inflame as many people as it discourages and actually make him a stronger candidate for president. I refuse any longer to try to see through to outcomes of these kinds of things. I mean, when I was a kid, when we were all kids, if if a candidate for president of the United States was tried with plausible evidence for a felony, and even if he was found not guilty, he'd be dead. He'd be finished.
Oh, yeah.
It'd just be over. But it's never over for Donald Trump. So who can know how this all ends?
Right.
Well,
right.
speaking of the outcomes of things, Roe v. Wade, I mean, which is a direct line to Trump also because of what has happened. I'll ask you for another prediction. What's the fallout for that, especially for people of color? Because I know in the Latino community, I mean, abortion is still an issue. If they're released from that, will that change the electorate at all? Or
Well,
what is the possibility
it's
there?
which Latino community, just to use an example. I mean, I
Right.
think this is true to a degree with lots of communities in the United States.
Yeah, because
There's
we're not a monolith. Remember that.
We're not a monolith, but it's a heavily young community. The average Latino in the United States is 10 years younger than the average American. And there's a broad difference of a public opinion among Latinos about abortion, depending on age. And also depending on whether you attend Mass or attend church regularly. If you're a regular churchgoer, you're more likely to support Dobbs. If you're not, you're less likely. But that's true of other Americans. But the thing about Latinos is they are still pretty widely Catholic, and there is broad difference in their level of observance. So it's hard to see. I mean, if I was handicapping this strictly on age, I'd think, oh, this is not good to inflame, to encourage young voters. If I'm a Republican in a purple state like Nevada or Arizona, anything that gets young Latinos to the polls, not something that I'm particularly happy about. So the electoral calculus around abortion is hard. But also, this may prove to us that we're able as a country to do something that was once thought to be unthinkable, which is create a real patchwork so that all you have to do is cross a state border to get to a clinic elsewhere, to go from East Chicago, Indiana, or Hammond, Indiana, and just go a little short distance and you're in Chicago and you're in a family planning clinic there and you get an abortion. It will be hard and it will disproportionately affect different Americans. And it's going to be ugly. And there are going to be children born who before Dobbs would otherwise not be born with different outcomes. Some of them will be neglected and abused. Some of them will be loved and treasured. And it's that individual as a thumbprint human variability that's really hard to predict. 10 years from now, after we've set up weird machinery, Rube Goldberg machinery, to donate to charities that fund plane tickets so somebody can go from Fort Worth to Chicago or from Fort Worth to Miami and get an abortion. I mean, it'll become institutionalized, and some of the real impact of this decision will be blunted. And quietly and tragically, women who do not want to be mothers will have children with more unpredictable effects. So again, like the January 6th hearings, this is one with a lot of tentacles and a lot of variables that are still at this point not easily predicted.
I have to ask you this question. I have a number of cousins, and I'm Mexican American, that are Trump supporters. And we try not to talk politics because, we don't want to split the family that much. I can't figure that out.
Well, I think it's part of the assimilation process. I think it's part of cultural assimilation. Just as Latino immigrants largely arrive in the United States as Roman Catholics and are in very large numbers becoming various kinds of evangelical, non-denominational Protestants, members of Assemblies of God and various Baptist churches. Being for Trump and being flag waving and also being very hostile to illegal immigration, even if your own family story involves illegal immigration, fascinating, is part of what it intergenerationally is the process of becoming just a regular American like anybody else. I think if you live outside a largely Latino community, that process moves on a different track. If more of your friends and neighbors and co-workers are not Latino, it moves on a different track. Who your kids' friends are and who they hang out with and how they see themselves will have some effect on this. Sociologists have been trying for decades to understand what happens to Latinos in out generations. So yeah, there's abuela and your parents and the you. What about your own kids? How Mexican, how Puerto Rican do they feel? Do they feel cultural affinity that will have an effect on their politics? Will it have an effect on their social attitudes? Or, like other Americans, will where you live have as heavy an impact? And what people around you are doing and thinking? If you go to a regional high school where the kids want to pray on the football field after the game, if you're a 16-year-old, do your sentiments move along with those of maybe kids from earlier immigrant generations, maybe kids who arrived as middle schoolers themselves or arrived as teenagers themselves and are a little aloof of that and not sure they want to be in it? Or do you say to yourself, yeah, I'm just like Joey. I'm just like Liam. I'm just like Navia. I'm going to go pray with them on the 50-yard line. I think this moves on a political track, an assimilational track, an economic track, because if you're mired in low mobility, low upward mobility, you may be more likely to see that as part of your predicament that makes you less likely to align with some of these more assimilated people. I think it's a fascinating question, but again, we're in process. We're in the middle. Right. And where these people land, their own kids, the ones who are Trump supporters, their own kids may have absolutely no use for that white nationalist stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's brings up a question I wanted to ask you. This what is it, the Patriot Front? Was that the one in Idaho that they amassed a little army to attack people in Coeur d'Alene?
They were all dressed up like they were going to Catholic school with the same uniforms and in a U-Haul truck. Right.
But what was shocking to me, they were all young men in their 20s. And I thought that maybe the younger generation, there might be a little bit more kind of blending. But it seems to me it's the same sort of thing that in the Middle East, when underemployed young men with no future were radicalized into the militants.
Or who are told day after day that they have no future.
Yes.
Through various media channels that not only tell them they have no future, but that certain Americans are taking away their future.
Yes. Do you think that process is going on here to some extent with these young men?
Yes, absolutely. But I think more and more Americans, immigration and diversification used to be a coastal and border phenomenon. There was no Ellis Island in the Southeast, in the American South. So you were more likely than you were anywhere else in the country to grow up in a community where everybody was native born and everybody was either black or white. And when I say black or white, that is descendants of earlier generations of European immigrants and African slaves. And that was it. And in the high plains, places like Coeur d'Alene, you were even less likely to grow up with anybody who was black. The only non-white person you ever saw was probably native. But because of spatial segregation and the weird way those states are organized, you saw them less. So you lived in a largely white world. All your members of Congress and the county board and your governor and your 2 senators, and they were all white. But you were also being told that a guy like Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani Yogurt, and Steve Jobs, who was the son of a Syrian immigrant, and people like the founders of Google, like Sergey Brin, were the ones stealing your future. So you were against immigration, and even though you weren't going to invent the next killer app, you thought, I could if I wanted to.
Yes.
If it wasn't for these guys who are making it less likely for me to get ahead. It's distressing because America was always the can-do place where you can reinvent yourself, and by dint of your own effort and your own drive, you could do better than your parents. And part of that was sustained not by the actuality of it, but by the belief that it was true. It was like Wile E. Coyote continuing to be able to run off the cliff and not falling until he had realized that he was over the cliff, until he realized that he could keep on running. And a lot of these families got ahead because they would run over the cliff, but they didn't know they were standing on air anymore. So they didn't fall. And so people would sort of fake it till they make it. People would take wild risks, leveraging their houses to the hilt to buy businesses or start businesses and stuff like that. Now we're a can't-do country. The very heavy messaging, the undertow is that a lot of things used to be possible, but they're not possible anymore, even though they're just as possible in a lot of ways as they've always
Exactly.
been.
Because immigrant communities are proving that every day.
Every day.
We get the job done.
Which only makes people crazier, though. It makes them mad. It doesn't make them, it doesn't reassure them about the country. It makes them mad.
So, Ray, you brought up praying on the 50-yard line, and that Supreme Court case actually was based here in Washington State. And now we see the Supreme Court with a super conservative majority. And I guess the question becomes, is it politically based? Is it based on law? It seems like John Roberts has lost control of the conservative wing.
The fascinating thing about that decision, if you read the opinions, is that they're predicated in an set of assumptions about what that coach was doing that turn out to be not true. And all the documents in the lower court opinions affirm that it was not true. He was running out to the 50-yard line. He wasn't quietly just heading out there and saying a private little prayer for himself. He was encouraging the kids to participate. He was asked to stop, and he didn't. He was doing something that clearly he was trying to test the third rail. He was personally trying to find out where the third rail is because he wanted to see where it is and wanted to upend the way things had always been done before. There are early 60s court cases, Abington and Engel versus Vitale and some others, that draw a line and say, look, public schools can't read the Bible anymore. Public schools can't have a corporate prayer like over the PA system, as a lot of schools had it, led by the principal or led by a dean. You just can't do that anymore in this country. And ever since that moment, the religious right, which was nascent then but is established now, has been organizing and sending cases into the court and starting to climb the appellate ladder, trying to test where the boundaries are. And what happened in earlier cases is that they decided, as long as it wasn't sponsored by the school and led by a member of staff, as long as it wasn't sanctioned or organized by the school, this could be student-led prayer carried on under student initiative. And, that became the rule of thumb. But no, that wasn't good enough for this guy. He wanted to test the law, and he has done so successfully. They say time and tide wait for no man. Well, he eventually waited till the tides changed and there was a 6-member majority that was ready to see it his way. Abington and Engel were good, durable laws. You know, when I was writing a book on the effect of religion on politics and the intertwining of religion in American politics, I told a story about being at the opening of the Chicago City Council one morning. And the saying the grace to open that day's session was a rotating task. And one day it fell to an elderly gent who had been a member of the council for many years and was very overtly and strongly Catholic. The Chicago City Council at that point had some Jewish members. It had a lot of Black Protestant members. It had a fair number of Catholic members. But it was a religiously mixed body. And this alderman got up in front of the body and gave this stem-winder, hard Orthodox Catholic prayer about the ever-blessed Virgin Mary, Jesus' mother, and her grace, and on and on and on. And I'm sitting there watching this and thinking, you know, this is a guy who they like him. He's an old member. They know him. So they're all just going to stand there with their heads bowed. But this is exactly the problem that comes up with this kind of thing. This wasn't a sort of consensus prayer that would distill the feelings of 50 members of the city council. This was this alderman giving a Roman Catholic, and not even a consensus Roman Catholic prayer, but this sort of Opus Dei thing that he was winging up at the podium. So later on, during a break in the proceedings, there were 3 of the Jewish aldermen talking to each other. So I walked over and I said, "Hey, alderman, how you doing?" And they all looked. "Hey, Ray, how you doing? Good to see you, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Look, I just wanted to ask you guys, since we're here," I mean, you know, Christian me and these 3 Jewish guys, "what did you make of today's grace?" And the oldest of the 3 of them said, "If you grow up in Chicago, you're used to it. When I went to public school as a kid, I had to say the Lord's Prayer every morning." And I said, "Well, but is that okay? Should you have had to say the Lord's Prayer every morning? After all, the Lord's Prayer isn't just any prayer. It's a prayer written by Jesus, who says, this is the way you should pray." And there was this guy, Bernie Stone, telling me that as a kid, he had to say the Lord's Prayer in a Chicago public school. He says, well, you know, you have to pick your battles. And there are things that you're going to fight about, and there are things that you're not going to fight about, and that was it. Another one, Marty Oberman, who was younger, said, "Look, I never liked it, but it was just the way things were back then." I said, "Okay, that's the way things were back then. It's the 1990s now. Should they still be that way?" He says, "Well, you know, George is George," sort of saying that alderman does his thing, and I'm not going to make a big deal about it. But I thought a lot about those guys, because growing up as a member of a minority religion, you always have to assume and internalize the idea that this is a Christian majority country and you're just going to have to put up with a certain amount of this stuff. And what those early 60s Supreme Court decisions did was say, no, in a pluralistic society, you just can't have readings from the King James Bible every morning and a Christian prayer to start the day. You just can't. The country is far more diverse and less religious than it was in the early 60s. And now we're having these rulings where now more overtly Christian practice can be introduced into the public school system. It's a fascinating thing to watch.
You know, and then pressing the third rail here, now you have Clarence Thomas, who's made it clear that he'd like to see other things overturned, gay marriage. Although I guess he's leaving out interracial marriage. So
that's cool. That's totally cool.
Yeah, for him anyway. He's become the kind of the guy that never asks anything in the court generally in any of their when their sessions, now has suddenly become more of the focus and has taken seemingly control of the conservative wing from John Roberts.
His ship has finally come in. Look, when he was confirmed in the early 90s, it was a very different court, a very different country. Well, he waited 30 years, and now he's got enough partners to change the sort of post-war liberal consensus that the court affirmed through various decisions. And now they're going to push back on that. We'll see. I mean, look out for the coming decision on the EPA. That may end up being much bigger than Roe because it will knock out the struts from underneath the federal government's ability to make law that applies to the whole country. So you can say, well, here in the West Virginia EPA, we're not going to take the guidance from the U.S. EPA. We're going to have our own standards as to how much coal dust can foul our rivers and streams.
Wow.
It's up to us. Well, that'll be a real shock to the system.
Back to the,
stand by.
Back to states' rights. Okay, let's turn the page here, Ray. You have had your ups and downs in, I guess, the last 6 years or so. You hosted Talk of the Nation for NPR. You spent about 14 years at the PBS NewsHour as a senior correspondent. You left. You went to Al Jazeera. You were working on a program there, and I think doing quite well. You enjoyed what you were doing. Then Al Jazeera goes belly up, and your life changes because suddenly it's like finding a job becomes tough for you, and on top of that, you get sick. You get cancer. You've had an interesting time over these last 6 years.
The ceiling was coming in, and there is you only find this out in layers. You never find it out all at once. When Al Jazeera went out of business, I hadn't been unemployed. I hadn't had trouble finding a job in more than 30 years, and I had a really formidable resume during that time. I also wrote 3 books that were very well received. So I thought, all right, it may take me a little while, but I'll find something. And it only dawns on you slowly that, in fact, the marketplace has decided it's moving on. And it doesn't matter how much experience you have. It doesn't matter that you might bring diversity to a newsroom that needs one. It doesn't matter that you've interviewed some of the best-known people on the planet for a generation. It just doesn't matter. And then while you're wrestling with that, my material life may be unraveling. I may find it more difficult to support my family. You then find out you have cancer, and everything becomes unsure after that. Not only am I maybe not going to have easy times finding a job, I may not have easy times remaining alive. So those twin punches in the gut really force some reconsideration of everything. Everything that you thought was solid, reliable, dependable, assumable about yourself and your life and who you are and how you felt and who you are to others and what you mean and what you mean to other people. All of that is suddenly under renegotiation. And maybe for the long haul, like this is it. You're never going to work again. It's really tough, but I couldn't just curl up in a ball into a fetal position and wait till it was all over. I had to try to keep on working, and I did. And things are improving. Things are getting back on track little by little.
How's your health?
I am in good shape. I passed my latest screening. The target is 5 years cancer-free. So I'm still well short of that, but I hit the 3-year mark, and we'll see. At 3 years, my chances of recurrence decline significantly in mathematical terms. At 5 years, they decline almost to the level of any other man my age who hasn't had cancer. So, we'll see. I'm feeling great. I took a 22-mile bike ride yesterday in the heat, and felt swell when it was over. So I'm in good shape.
What do you think might have caused your challenge in getting work again? Did you think it was age?
Yes, I I have come to the conclusion, watching who gets hired for all the jobs that I've applied for in the past 5 years. Yeah, it's rank ageism.
Yeah.
There's really nothing to explain it, but also it also happened to coincide with Me Too. And while I had no blots on my record or letters in my file, there was a strong movement toward hiring women to replace the men who were being Me Too'd out of jobs. So every time I applied for one of those jobs, I realized, uh-oh, who knows how well this would go. It doesn't matter if there's no bad marks on my on my file. I cannot change the fact that I am the result of an X and Y chromosome getting going, and in job after job, women have been hired to replace, you name it, John Hockenberry, Charlie Rose, um, Lenny Lopate in New York, again and again and again. These jobs come empty. Tom Ashbrook in Boston, and much younger women have been hired to fill the slot. Cool. If not enough women were working in newsrooms, great. I needed a job, and I needed that not to be the reason. Two things that I could not change: the date on my birth certificate and the fact that I was a man. I couldn't get around either of them, and I couldn't, overcome them in the marketplace. So here we are.
What kept? Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to get back to your cancer because obviously that's a story that's close to my heart. I mean, I'm just going through the early stages of this. What motivated you to do your podcast? Because I've listened to it so far, and so much of it rings true to me. And I'm just wondering why did you decide to share your story like that?
Well, there's an idealistic, cool answer and a not so cool answer, but I'll give them both.
Okay.
I was asked to give a talk at church about this. So I went to church on a Sunday, talked about what I was going through because I hadn't told anybody. One of the things that occurs to you when you get a cancer diagnosis, when you're in the middle of a bout of long-term unemployment, is, oh my God, I can't tell anybody. I'll never get a job. So I didn't tell anybody. So this was almost my coming out party. I went to a packed congregation, told the story of my diagnosis and treatment. And afterward, several people came up to me and said, "You really should write about this. That was terrific. I've never heard it described just that way. I've never heard it explained just that way. And I think it would help people because a lot of people are going through it. A lot of people are caregivers for people who are going through it. A lot of people have gotten diagnoses in the past and have gotten past it, but would be interested in hearing the story you told. And a lot of people have lost people to it who I think would get some comfort from what you had to say." It had never occurred to me before, literally. But I did. I started to write a script for a podcast series. Then, up out of the blue, a podcast company got in touch and said, "Hey, you got any ideas of anything you want to talk about?" And I said, "Well, just getting over cancer treatment, and I just wrote this set of scripts for a series on cancer. Cool, let's do that." So I recorded the episodes. They're in the can. Episode 5 will be out momentarily, and there are 8 in all. And I urge you to listen to the things I thought about when my body was trying to kill me, because it's, I hope, interesting, informative storytelling.
And by the way, you can find that on all the main podcast platforms, I believe.
Absolutely. You can find them anywhere.
Yeah, I heard it on Apple. And so I really encourage people to listen to it because particularly if you're facing an illness, because I think it's fascinating. And, actually, it's interesting to me because, Ray, all these years as a reporter, you don't want to become the story, but you did.
It was not easy to use the capital letter I in stories.
Yeah.
A lifetime of habit discourages that. And I had to, sometimes I would look over a script and say, no, this is too clinical. This is too objective. This is a subjective story. remember you're telling your story, and I'd go
Right.
back and fix it. But my habit of heart, my habit of mind, my habit of practice, my habit of professional habit is to keep myself out of the story. And so it took a little doing to remember to get myself in there, because that was the point in this particular case.
How important was your family in all of this?
Extremely important, in part because one of the things I thought about more than anything was leaving them too early,
Hmm.
and the damage and the hurt and the pain that would cause if I was gone. And I figured if this is worse than I know, if this is eventually going to be the thing that ends my life, I want to talk to them and talk about this in one way. If this is something that just leaves me reduced or diminished or sick permanently, and the way I'm going to be in the world from now on is a somewhat physically diminished character, we have to talk about that. And if I'm going to get through this for now, because I always use for now as a qualifier, because once you've had cancer, you can never confidently say, well, that's it. I'm done with that. That's never going to happen to me again. If I get past this and am healthy again, it will be a different kind of experience. But I kept bouncing off of them. It's like shining a light somewhere, and the only way you know that it's happening is because it's bouncing back to you. If you shine a light into the void, you get no feedback. But I was getting feedback from my wife and my kids, and in effect, almost going through this with them. When I was writing the series, I said to one of my kids, well, what did you make of the whole thing? Now that it's over, or this part is over, what were you feeling? And my youngest said that she was terrified that I was going to die. And, she was only 18, 19 years old when this was happening. So that's a terrible thing to lose a parent at that age. But I also remember how practical you were about the whole thing. And when I talked to you about leaving college for a while, you said, absolutely do not do that. Go back to school. We'll stay in touch. We'll stay in constant contact. And, if I get better, then you won't have lost any ground. And if I don't get better, then we can, reassess then about whether or not you could stay on track for graduation. But she says, you were so matter of fact and concrete about those things. I remember that making me feel more confident that you were going to make it, because it sounded like you. So
I'm curious too, since you and Matt have cancer in common, uh, what would you say to him as far as dealing with all of this? Now, Matt has been through this before. He had prostate cancer now, but what he's facing now could be a bit more challenging.
well, as he knows, you don't find everything out that you need to know when you want to know it. So cancer has this way of only giving out, surrendering its information, its crucial, vital information, in dribs and drabs. So in logic, they call them if-then propositions.
Mm-hmm.
If this is the case, then I have to do this. And you want to get moving. You always want to know more, so you know what the then is. Give me the if so I can know what the then is and make up my mind. And one of the most frustrating things about the experience was always feeling like there had to be another test, and there had to be another wait and see, and there had to be another diagnostic period, or another doctor to see. And you just want to know, okay, I need to do some things to save my life here. Tell me what they are. And it's very frustrating, only finding things out little by little. And I'm sure
Yeah.
you felt the same way, Matt, at some point.
Oh, every day, every day. I mean, I just have to tell myself it's a process. I mean, life is a process. This is definitely a process.
Yeah. And for me, as his good friend, and I'm not the only one, what advice do you have for me and others that we're going to be supporting him? And I think we've told him, I don't know how many times, that we're going to be there.
Well, the question then becomes, what is the content of being there? And sometimes it's just to listen as someone unloads their frustration or their disappointment. Sometimes it's to be encouraging without being Pollyanna-ish. Um, I was just with a dear close friend of 40 years who's not going to make it. And he's been listening to the series too, except, he already knows he's not going to make it. His doctors have told him that it would be great if he sees Christmas, but not even to rely on that. And here's this guy who used to run marathons, who used to be on the dawn patrol, and his show started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there he was, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and ready to give you the morning news. And he is still absorbing, getting used to the idea that they're kind of running out of courts of appeal. This is it. This is the real end, and it's being measured in months, not in years. And I asked him open-ended, leading questions that didn't put a thumb on the scale about a desired answer, to just give him a chance to say what's on his mind and say what's on his heart. And the hard thing was leaving him and knowing that may be the last time I ever see him in life. It was touching and sad, and I really, it was hard even thinking about it in the days after that when I left him. So in some cases, what a friend and a supporter does is predicated on the understanding on the part of both parties that this is it. There is no happy ending. It's unlikely that we're going to be having these talks for very long from now on. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah. Just got to be there. So now, what all are you doing now? Besides the podcasting, is that going to grow more?
Well, I have 3 series up and running.
Yeah.
One is done in conjunction with KQED FM and the World Affairs Council, and it's called World Affairs. And it's a weekly show. It exists as a radio show that you can listen to live on KQED, you stream it wherever you are in the country, or you can listen to the podcast, which is available on all the major podcast platforms. I completed 1 season of a series called Going for Broke, done in cooperation with the Economic Hardship Reporting Project and The Nation. And that's just won 2 nice national awards, one for excellence in financial journalism, one from the Society of Professional Journalists. Season 2, I'm going to start reporting that in the coming weeks. I have the series, The Things I Thought About When My Body Was Trying to Kill Me, about cancer, and we'll see how that goes. I think the downloads and the feedback is going well, but the nice thing about a closed-ended series like that is that it's up there as a document, and people can start it and listen to the whole thing anytime. And I'm writing my next book, which will come out at the end of 2023, on modern American immigration, because all the laws changed in the 1960s, and it changed who came and where they came from in ways that are right now rippling out through America in stuff like the Great Replacement Theory. The Great Replacement Theory doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which swung the axis of immigration to this country away from Europe and toward Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So that'll be fun. I mean, the reporting has been a blast, and I hope it's a successful book. I have a pilot with PBS on more spiritual matters. It's called Wisdom Keepers, and it's sort of about the best thinking of the last couple of thousand years that helps you make sense of tough times. Will they buy the pilot and make it into a series? I don't know, but I hope so. It would be nice to be able to continue to do that. And right now I'm planning to be a visiting professor in the fall at NYU Shanghai. And I'll be teaching an international student body in one of the most exciting cities in the world, Shanghai. And my son lives there, so it'll be fun to have him to hang out with. He loves the place and he has valued his time in China. So life's exciting, life's interesting, and life has some cool possibilities waiting out there. And I just hope to hit my 5-year mark so I can keep on working. And at some point, I'd even like to retire. But but right now, there's a lot of good stuff going on, so I'm not thinking about that.
Well, this business of ours is very addictive. So I retired in February of 2018. Matt retired long before me, but somehow we keep coming back, and just because.
Well, when something big happens,
oh yeah,
isn't it like hearing a fire engine in the distance?
It
I wonder
totally
where
is.
he's going. I wonder where they're
Oh.
going. I wonder how. Sounds like a lot of units responding. Maybe I
Right.
should go.
No.
It never leaves you.
It never leaves you.
If you're a lifer in this business, that idea, something's happening, I ought to be there, never leaves you.
So let's end on this. What's your advice to those up and coming young journalists, and particularly young journalists of color?
Well, right now, the business is in the process of tearing itself apart and reassembling itself. The business model is totally up for grabs. The future is very hard to know. So while it's one of the most threatened times in the last century to be a reporter, it's also one of the most exciting and promising times at the same time. And you got to live that paradox. You have to live that paradox where actually fewer people are making a full-time living as a journalist than 22 years ago. At the turn of the century, there were more full-time salaried working reporters in this country than there are today. And there's so much more stuff, so much more content, so many more outlets. Well, that's part of the revolution that we've undergone. We've become a contingent labor force. You are more likely to spend at least a big chunk of your career self-employed, spend a big chunk of it as a freelance or a contract player. Be ready for that. Understand what it means to run your own business, have an LLC, to do your own taxes. Understand how to navigate having multiple employers, all of whom want your undivided attention, but none of whom want to pay for it. So it's a complicated time to be getting in on the front end, but also an incredibly exciting time because so many of the barriers that existed when the three of us got into this aren't there anymore. When you were a radio guy, you couldn't be on TV because you weren't a TV guy. And if you were on TV, print people wouldn't touch you because they'd say, you're just a TV guy. Those barriers no longer exist. You can be an anything person because as long as you're creating consumable content that's honest and interesting and listenable and readable and true, you can make a living in this business. So I wish you luck. A lot of you are going to bail out along the way because it's hard now. You got to be your own equipment manager and your own corporate manager and your own guy or gal out there soliciting new work. And you have to make sure you're getting paid. So you have to be your own payroll and employment manager. And you've got to subcontract other people who need to work with you to do other things. It is much more complicated than just getting up and going to work and having all that stuff taken care of. A retirement fund, buying your own health insurance, all of this is both more possible, which is cool, and more complicated, which is not cool than it used to be. So I never, as an older adult, ever had to buy my own health insurance. Well, then I had to. And it was important because I couldn't make that decision just for myself. I had to cover my wife and my kid. And so it's great that the Affordable Care Act exists because I'd be uninsurable now without it. With a cancer diagnosis, I'd go to Aetna and say, hey, Aetna, hey, Blue Cross Blue Shield, you want to handle my policy? They would say, no, forget it. Forget it. You're going to cost us money. So the tools we need to do our work have in some ways gotten better. And that goes for the physical tools as well. to shoot a TV story with your friggin' phone is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's a better picture than the picture I took when I was a CNN correspondent in Los Angeles in the early 80s. And those guys had TK-76s, those heavy, heavy, awful cameras on their shoulders. This takes a better picture. And it's a phone too. so, you know, a lot of the tools and toys that we use to do our work have become just magnificently more able and more powerful. So that makes our lives easier too. So it's a mixed picture. It's both way more difficult and way more exciting and promising and full of potential. So the good ones won't be discouraged by anything I say.
It's all about hustling, and it's all about desire. And if you have a passion for it, just go for it. Hey, you can even work out of your living room. So Ray, I hope you'll keep the door open for us to come back to you now and then to maybe talk about some issues.
Check that I'm still alive.
Yeah, well, that too. Yes. And you and Matt can talk about things. But yes, we'll do that for sure. But definitely would like to stay in touch about some of the madness that's happening in our world, and to get your analysis, because you're really good, and people need to hear your voice. And as a Latino, Latinos need to hear you too. And
since people are already listening to you on a podcast, they've already gone a lot of the way toward listening to my 3 podcasts. So
there
listen.
you go. Yes, please do listen. Thanks for taking the time, Ray. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks a lot. Good luck, Matt. Good to hear from you, Enrique.
Okay.
Bye-bye.